Beyond the gate's revelations on Wednesday, September 10th, Eva was no stranger to loneliness in a fight. She had once stood alone defending her mother against the Dupree family's covert assaults. A clan not only powerful but connected in ways that reached into every corner of the political and judicial system. But this time was different. This time, Eva didn't just want to react. She wanted to strike. When Leslie decided to double her offer to seize control of a pivotal property, Eva understood her mother had chosen not to retreat again. No more tears, no more withdrawal. Leslie had taken her daughter's hand, and together they were stepping into a fight to the bitter end against the Dupree empire. Eva also knew, however, that without someone who truly understood the law at their back, every bold move could become a catastrophe. And the only person she trusted to go all the way with her was Tomas. Tomas was not easily swayed. He was a principled attorney who had handled highly political cases while keeping his ethical footing. Eva knew that, indeed, that integrity was what had once made her respect and care for him. But now she could not let emotion obstruct strategy. When she met Tomas on a taut evening, she brought no tears and no pleading. She brought files, evidence, and a legal plan spelled out down to each clause. She didn't ask Tomas to do this out of affection. She appealed to reason, arguing that without timely legal action, Leslie would be forced back yet again, and everything they had fought to build would collapse. Tomas listened, and doubt flickered in his eyes. He knew exactly who the Duprees were. He had once received overtures from them, had sat across the negotiating table from Bill, a man he respected even when he disagreed with his political tactics. That was why Eva's request put him in a bind. If he helped her, this wouldn't be just a lawsuit. It would be a declaration of war on an entire system he had always avoided confronting head-on. Worse, if Bill learned Tomas was backing Eva and Leslie, he could use his influence to push for a professional conduct inquiry, jeopardize Tomas's license, or cost his firm every government contract. Eva saw the hesitation in Tomas's eyes, and it made her falter for a heartbeat. She didn't want to endanger him, much less turn the man she cared for into an enemy of people he once regarded as family. But she couldn't turn back. What had been done to Leslie, the isolation, the public humiliations, the silent blows from the Duprees, left Eva no choice, and she believed that if Tomas truly grasped every layer of this, if he could see the cruelty behind the polished sheen of charity galas and media handshakes, his doubt would vanish. Tomas loved Eva. That was undeniable. But love could not replace the independence of his professional ethics. So instead of agreeing on the spot, he proposed to review every document, test the legality, weigh the risk. If he joined, he wanted to be sure he was not only protecting Leslie but also protecting himself from becoming a personal instrument in a conflict that could turn into a political minefield. He knew that if he let feeling take the wheel, he would lose the reason he had guarded throughout his career. Eva left in silence. She didn't cry or beg. She set a meticulously tabbed file on Tomas's desk and, beside it, a small photo of Leslie on her wedding day. A reminder that this was not just a case but an entire life on the line. In the days that followed, Tomas was torn between two worlds. On one side, justice, truth, and loyalty to the woman he had always seen as a light within the gray zones of the law. On the other, strategy, respect for Bill, and fear of punishment should he dare to stand against one of the most influential families in the region. In the end, when Tomas returned to Eva's office, he didn't bring a refusal. He brought risk analyses, proposed adjustments, and a sincere warning. If they did this, they had to do it the right way. No bending the law, no media games, no lighting the fuse of a scandal. Eva nodded, not because she fully agreed, but because she understood. She had just saved a friend and, at the same time, secured a fighter. What Tomas didn't know was that word of his meeting with Eva had already reached Bill. A source in real estate had leaked news of a fresh filing from Tomas's firm, with details that made Bill suspect someone was preparing a counterstrike. If his suspicions proved true, this would be more than a clash between two iron-willed women. It would be a declaration of war between the old order and a new generation. Tomas was no longer a bystander. He now stood at the eye of the storm, where law, ethics, feeling, and politics intertwined like a maze with no exit. And Eva, who had once stepped back for love, now faced the greatest choice of her life: to prevail or to lose the man she loved. All the tension that had built during the search for Chelsea finally detonated when she and Allison were forced to face each other at the police station. Under the cold interrogation lights, there was no room for excuses or distorted fragments of memory. Only two people laid bare. One so wounded she had lost her grip on reality, and one victim struggling to hold on to herself. Allison sat there, her gaze steady, without remorse. What radiated was a chilling, unwavering conviction that she and Chelsea were a true couple, that they were married, and that everything that had happened was merely a cruel misunderstanding. In Allison's mind, she was no kidnapper. She was a wife deprived of her right to live beside the person she loved, a victim of a society that didn't understand true love, the only one fighting for a family she believed had been forged by a bond of souls. Chelsea, by contrast, though exhausted by what she had endured, remained almost numbingly calm. Inside her raged a storm of terror, betrayal, and loss of control. She had never imagined it would end in such a shattering psychosis. The truth was, she had once pitied Allison, had even felt a certain closeness during the brief time Allison served as a companion in a campaign effort. But from that compassion, Allison had constructed a fantasy universe in which they were spouses, where Chelsea belonged to her and only her. Chelsea didn't know whether this was a result of psychological disorder or the product of manipulation carefully prepared in the dark. What was clear was that Allison could no longer distinguish between what was true and what she wanted to believe. When Allison declared that they should be brought home together, the room fell silent for a beat, as if the world paused to measure the gravity of that demand. She wasn't merely asking to see Chelsea. She asserted that they were married, and demanded to live with her, as they had vowed in a wedding no one could verify as real or imagined. She even produced a copy of a marriage certificate she believed had been legalized in another state, a document riddled with errors, likely propped up by fraudulent statements or fabricated by her own hand. To Allison, it wasn't a forgery. It was proof of love, and Chelsea's rejection wasn't merely personal injury. It was a betrayal so grave it demanded punishment. Jacob watched from behind the one-way mirror, fists clenched as he held his anger in check. He had suspected Allison had psychological issues, but he had never imagined they ran this deep. As an attorney, he knew Allison might invoke mental illness to avoid criminal prosecution. As a human being who had witnessed what Chelsea endured, he couldn't accept Allison continuing to live inside her delusion. He knew that without strict supervision and compulsory treatment, she could return, and next time, it wouldn't be a mere mistaken reunion. When officers pressed her about the abduction, Allison answered with a bewilderment so sincere it chilled the room. She didn't believe she had kidnapped anyone. In her mind, Chelsea came with her for love. She recalled dinners together, embraces she remembered, promises she insisted had been made. Chelsea denied it all. Not a single memory was real. She had never slept with Allison, never worn a ring, never signed a thing. The only thing she had done was show kindness to a former ally, and that kindness had been twisted into a punishment. When the legal team moved for a psychiatric evaluation, Allison erupted. She shouted that no one had the right to separate spouses, and that if Chelsea continued to deny it, she must be under someone's coercion. Perhaps Jacob's or even Bill's, whom Allison believed was orchestrating their separation. These accusations were baseless, part of a belief system contorted into paranoia. Allison no longer had control over the boundary between truth and fantasy, love and possession, freedom and coercion. Chelsea asked for one thing: safety. She didn't care how the law handled Allison, as long as Allison was never allowed near her again. But the chilling thought remained. If Allison truly believed Chelsea was her wife, then legal barriers and therapy could prove inadequate to keep her away from her target. And in a society where the legal system sometimes lags behind the complexities of mental illness, Chelsea understood she could not simply sit still and trust the system to protect her. Jacob planned to file an emergency petition for a permanent restraining order and consult a forensic psychiatrist to compel Allison's commitment to a secure psychiatric facility. But he also knew that with skilled counsel, Allison could invoke liberty interests and a refusal to acknowledge illness. That meant Chelsea had to brace for a longer battle than she had imagined. What frightened her most wasn't the paperwork, the statutes, or the interrogations. It was Allison's eyes when she entered the room. Not hateful, not afraid, but brimming with love, as if Chelsea truly were her wife. As if everything that had happened were only a small obstacle on a love story Allison refused to abandon. A gaze like that, more dangerous than any sentence. While schemes and wounds continued to smolder across Fairmont Crest, September 10th opened onto rare gentle, affecting moments, as Martin and Smitty finally shared a peaceful reunion after days of strain. Against a backdrop of fractured families, custody battles, and the aftershocks of recent episodes, their reconnection felt like a reminder that love, even when choked for a time by circumstance, can find its way back. The two fathers of Samantha and Tyrell seemed to be slowly mending, though it was unclear whether this was a true reconciliation or simply a quiet interlude before the next storm. What was clear was that both wanted what was best for their child, and that child had become the unwitting catalyst forcing two once conflicted men to learn compromise, forgiveness, and the priority of family over pride. Yet as one family rediscovered an old rhythm, another bond, more complex, more painful, was tilting toward the unpredictable. The signs from Fairmont Crest were difficult to read, but it was plain another couple stood on the edge of a turning point. Ashley and Derek were names long linked with tragedy, regret, and questions that had never been fully answered. After the injury that put Derek in a wheelchair, Ashley had been the only one at his side in the early crisis. But that closeness pulled her into a maze of feelings she could not escape, especially because Derek wasn't just an ex. He was the man who had once made her believe in a future, before everything shattered under secrets left unspoken. The question was stark. Was Derek truly paralyzed, or was this part of a subtle manipulation to regain control over Ashley? Whispers were beginning to spread among fans and even within the circle itself, that perhaps Derek was performing disability to bind Ashley with pity. Each time she tried to step away, he reminded her of their once happy days, and she couldn't cut clean as she should. If it was a performance, it was entering its final act, where the truth was about to be dragged into the light. Conversely, if Derek still genuinely loved Ashley and his approach was sincere, everything would become more tangled. Ashley herself had never fully outrun the old feeling. She remembered the Derek of before, the man who carried her over the threshold of their first apartment, who said that with her, he would give up his career. Those memories did not fade easily, and when Derek was suddenly more vulnerable than ever, she softened. But love could not be the price of her peace. If Derek was hiding something like the ability to stand or the use of painkillers to anesthetize others psychologically, he himself would crush any chance of a reunion. As they drifted closer, both hovered on the brink of an instinctive choice. Their love life had once burned hot, and that spark had never fully died, only been compressed by months of distance. A reunion, whether a kiss or a single lapse across the physical line, could be liberation or a trap that dragged them into the old cycle. For Ashley, this was not merely physical. It was a question of power, of choice, of whether she was stepping into something healthy or slipping back under the sway of a man she no longer truly knew. For Derek, even if the feeling was real, his methods were skating a dangerous edge between tenderness and possession, in what might have looked like a romantic interval. When both reached for each other to soothe their loneliness, a decision was made. Perhaps a tight embrace, a sudden kiss, or a moment of surrender. The consequences would not be simple. If Derek was not honest, that kiss would become the fuse for a dangerous backlash when Ashley realized she'd been used again. If both were sincere, the relationship would still have to navigate suspicion, judgment, and the insecurity inherited from their past. Whatever the outcome, September 10th would mark an emotional turning point for two bonds moving in opposite directions. One family might reconcile for the sake of children and memory. One couple might resurrect something for the sake of desire and regret. But at Fairmont Crest, every relationship carries risk, because every heart has broken before, and every decision is paid for in blood, tears, or the loss of self. once regarded as a model of stability amid Fairmont Crest's subterranean power struggles. Ted and Nicole now stood among the ruins of trust, eroded by secrets, schemes, and slow-burn injuries. In the September 10th episode, that fracture split wider when Ted's, for the family actions were dissected not with gratitude, but with suspicion and disappointment. A man who once held both esteem and love was losing them both. And the most dangerous part was that he didn't fully understand why. Ted believed that blocking Leslie from purchasing the mansion across from the Dupree home was sensible and necessary. In his eyes, it protected Nicole from an unnecessary showdown, keeping two women, once partners, longtime quiet rivals, from playing a winner-take-all game on the same street. What Ted wouldn't admit was that he acted not only to avoid conflict, but to keep power, to control the tempo of Nicole's life, to ensure that anyone who approached her, even Chelsea's biological grandmother, would have to pass through his shadow. Nicole was not naive. She had once believed Ted was reliable, a steady shoulder in family storms. But after months fighting to save Chelsea, after the shock of Leslie's return and the revelation that she was the child's grandmother, Nicole began to reassess. When Ted appeared at the hospital offering to visit Chelsea with the air of a quiet hero, she thanked him, because it seemed the polite thing to do. But when secrets started to surface, when she heard from Leslie that someone had used political leverage to stall the mansion purchase, and when the trail led back to Ted, everything snapped into focus. The question was no longer why did Ted do this, but whom did that decision truly protect? Nicole could not shake the feeling of manipulation. If Ted truly meant to shield her, why not come directly to her and speak plainly? Why resort to back channels, to ties within the governmental apparatus? And was his refusal to let Leslie live near her grandchild really for Nicole's sake, or because he wanted to ensure that Leslie, with all her power to influence, couldn't wedge open any path for Nicole toward an independent life? Ted, at heart, was no villain. He was a man trying to salvage a family he had been losing, piece by piece. He had hoped that by doing the right things, even the murky ones, he could clear the obstacles so Nicole would remember his worth and come back. He had pictured walking home with her after a long day at the hospital, with Chelsea asleep, the house quiet, everything restored. He didn't see that he was living in an illusion, and that every act, wrapped in the language of family, was stripping Nicole of choice and autonomy. The confrontation erupted without theatrics or tears. It unfolded in a stretch of silence, in glances emptied of trust, in questions unanswered and thank yous that now rang hollow. Nicole began to look at Ted not as a support, but as an obstacle holding her back when she only wanted to move forward, even if that meant facing Leslie, the past, and unhealed wounds. Ted stood there alone, abandoned by the very person he had tried to protect. He did not understand why his efforts were read as betrayal. But in a world of women as formidable as Nicole and Leslie, where trust cannot be bought with secret maneuvers, Ted was no hero. He was a man lost, trying to repair with power what should be healed with honesty. And as the last filament of hope dimmed, as Nicole no longer met him with believing eyes, every calculation, even the deception of Leslie for some imagined greater good, lost its meaning. Sometimes we don't lose someone because of one colossal wrong, but because of 100 quiet acts we never had the courage to admit.